I now give the floor to Giovanni Puglisi, who's president of the Italian General Association for UNESCO. Thank you very much, Mr. Mantica, members of the government and the region, representative, the Minister for the Fine Arts and Cultural Assets, Mr. Bandarin, Ambassador, members of the authorities, ladies and gentlemen. The President of the National Commission for the UNESCO can only make a short presentation which must go to the point of the subject we are dealing with today. Already in the window of the bookshop, you have identified the cover of the book you were looking for. Following this visual input, you go through the crowd and you look at all the books that you haven't read, which are looking at you from the shelves that try to intimidate you. But you know that you must not be in awe of these books, because these books are go on for acres and acres, and there are acres of books that you might not want to read, books that are made only for reading, books that have been read without even opening them. Well, there are also books that have been read before they were even written, and so you go on beyond the first wall, and then you have a fantasy of the books where, if you had various lives to read, you would lives to live, you would read these. But unfortunately, the number of days you have to live are what they are. With a fast move, you jump over them and you go towards the books that you want to read. But before reading them, you should read others. They're too expensive, and perhaps you want to wait when they are sold discounted. These books, perhaps when they're reprinted in paperback editions, books that you might ask somebody to lend you, books that everybody has read, and therefore it's as if you too had read them. So going beyond this assault, you go beyond the walls of the fort, where there are the books that you have planned to read for a long time, books that you have been looking for years without finding them, books that deal with something that you are interested in at this point in time, books that you want to have handy at any point in time, books that you might put aside to read during the summer, books that you need because you need to put them side by side with other books on your shelves, books that are raising a sudden frantic curiosity in you that is not at all justifiable. And therefore, it has been possible for you to reduce the number of forces on the field, which is very big nonetheless. However, it can be calculated in a finite manner. This relief is somehow annihilated by the ambush of the books that you have read in the past, or books that you pretend you have read. Well, you should actually read them. Now, all of this is that once you go through the titles of the books that are on the shelves in a bookshop, you direct your steps towards a book by Italo Calvino, if on a winter night, a traveler. So you grasp a copy which is fresh from the print, and you go straight to the cash desk. I wanted to dedicate a long part of my introductory speech to the reading of the metatextual book by Italo Calvino, because I think that in an exemplary manner, and to some extent he condenses the relationship between the book and the reader in the century which has just gone by. Now, going through these lines, you can find a bit of everything: the physical aspect of relationship with the book, the obsession for its possession in order to have an exclusive, intimate relationship, the economic and industrial chain that is necessary to make this book on the one hand, and on the other hand, it makes it an obstacle because there is a multiplicity of stimuli and alternatives. you find the preliminary trip that the reader has to make before undertaking the other trip inside the book, reading it. It seemed to me that Italo Calvino's text could be a starting point because it provides us with the basis, with a comparison from which we can question ourselves on future change, the change that this forum wishes to understand and perhaps to govern. I said earlier on that if the lines of If on a Winter's Night a Traveller well express the relationship between the book and the reader in the 19th century, it also represents equally well the essential traits of centuries and centuries of relationships between the books and their readers. There is nothing more physical than the relationship between a reader and the written code and his learning to decode what is written and his astonishment before the multitude of choices and the possible routes that a reader can find when he steps for the first time inside the Alexandria library. And the astonishment is equally the same as that of Calvino's reader. It is, however, a fact that centuries of relationships lie on the fact that the protagonist has, the book has remained unchanged for over 2 millennia, at least starting from the introduction of the Codex between the 1st and the 2nd century after Christ. Gutenberg's revolution most certainly introduced extraordinary quantitative changes because it broadened the public of readers endlessly and therefore disseminating knowledge. I will not speak about the role of the print in the dissemination of the freedom of thought and religion, but it also led to extraordinary quantitative changes because the written text was brought under the control of its author, and it was removed from the control of the copyists, which substantially did not change the structure of the book, but made changes nonetheless. So some people have spoken about an object which is ergonomically perfect. Some have compared the book to the perfection of the wheel. Whatever the case, for the first time after 2 millennia, this object is structurally doubted with everything that it brings with it, which is reflected on the various sessions in which the scientific committee has very wisely articulated this forum. But is it possible, I wonder, this is not a rhetorical question, it is a question that I have raised at least starting from 2 considerations. First, that the digital revolution, which has invested our lives in the last decades, finds it difficult in imposing itself in the passage between the book, the paper book, and the e-book. If we think of how a CD has replaced a vinyl disc or cassettes, or how DVDs have replaced VHS and video cassettes, and how the mobile phone or how the computer has replaced a typewriter and so on, well, we can see that the digital book is finding it more difficult to find a place for itself, and this is because there are speeds in the world that cannot be compared. Some have been very fast, but this one in particular is going much more slowly. The second consideration I would like to make, which is linked to the first one, which explains it to some degree, is that the e-book does not wish to be considered as a new object, but rather it runs after the traditional book using the technological innovations that allow it to look like the traditional book, which is similar to the invention of electronic ink. The e-book, in other words, is suggesting itself as a bad copy of the book, with the only advantage that it is portable. It does not seem, however, to be able to produce a qualitative change in the experience of reading, which is what happened in music, in visual arts, or in writing or communication, with the other instruments that I have just recalled. And it is not a chance that the publishing industry for the moment is totally concentrated on the digitization of periodicals and daily papers, rather than the production of e-books. The latter are finding it hard to become competitive on the market. A recent survey of an Italian consumers magazine, Altro Consumo, shows how the price of electronic books are mostly the same, if not higher, than traditional books, despite the curbing of production and printing costs. In other words, we don't seem to be faced with a very quick change, but rather we seem to have before us a process that can be achieved, if it is achieved, in the medium or long term. Paradoxically, however, this slowness of the whole process is giving us an extraordinary possibility to govern change so as to obtain the best possible advantages for our society and for the world surrounding us. And the potentials that, from this point of view, are really endless. The environmental potentials, which means that fewer trees, water, petrol will be used. And for example, the waste connected to the publishing industry, the possibility of making scientific progress, international intellectual collaboration through a distribution system which takes place at the same time throughout the world, not only in the case of best-selling books, but also in the case of specialist essays, literacy, education, the spreading of culture in small towns and in the large cities alike. Once the digital divide has been filled in Africa or in the smaller islands, there will be a potential for development and freedom that all of this brings with it. It is our task, the task of UNESCO in particular, to use the technologies of digital systems to achieve this. And if in a not distant future, as I hope, it will not even be possible to imagine an event like In the Name of the Rose, where a community of the learned men can hide something to the world, will be totally overturned, and everything literary, philosophical, scientific will be open to the world, and we will have done our task. And in the evening, when we come home, those men, women, or children of our world can choose a book from their shelves, light their bedside lamp, and physically turn over the pages of their book. Thank you. Thank you.